Okay, awesome. Good, happy Thursday afternoon. It's leap year. It's very exciting to have you here. We are going to talk about what went wrong this month. Everything that I had that wasn't, let's just say, the easiest transactions. There's a couple of doozies, and my point of doing this is to try and help make sure that we all learn from mistakes and we move forward with knowledge and know how to solve problems that may not be something that's on your radar. There were a couple this month that I have never had to deal with before, and wow, they were just a little bit more surprising than I expected to have happened. So let me share my screen and I will share with you so you can follow along with my notes here. Okay, so few fun, really big ones happened this month. We had a client who there was an issue with all the rains that we had between January and February here in San Diego. Definitely 100-year rains, very intense. They did not share that there had now become a leak in the roof, but a tarp would suddenly appeared during one of the inspections. Questions were asked, information wasn't shared. So then the buyer decided to have, rightly so, investigate further and get a mold inspection. Well, prior to the mold inspector arriving, the seller chose to go up into the attic and start scrubbing the mold to clean it up for the mold inspector being able to check things out. I'm not an expert in mold. I don't know everything about mold, but what I do know is when you disturb something like that, you have now freed the spores up. They're now airborne and can attach themselves to other things. This was very risky for the seller to do. It put at exposure for many parties. Don't do that. If you've got a problem in the house that you're not an expert about, or there's something of concern, let's get experts in that know how to handle this. This is actually potentially a health hazard for not only the occupants of the property, but anybody coming into the property. And that's where we get into liability and legal and bleh. Nobody wants to deal with that. Make sure when you are taking your listing and sharing with your clients, properties are sold as is in California. Every contract is sold as is. Buyer always has the right to request. Seller does not even have to respond to the request for repairs. That's just what it is. And the price is what the market will bear. And then credits come depending on during investigations. That's the whole part of the song and dance, the negotiations, everything we do. But when you have somebody deciding to remedy things on their own, when they're not an expert, they can be causing themselves harm and detriment. They can cause you harm and detriment, the brokerage, people coming in. Make sure you're aware. Make sure you're talking to your clients, educating them before you even put it on the market. Let's be real about the property. Some of my agents choose and brokerages choose to have a physical inspection done ahead of time so that they know what they're dealing with and what they can negotiate and mitigate. And some don't want that. So you're going to want to check with your broker of record how you want to move forward. But when you have a property that there may be some questionable issues, it's always easier to negotiate from a point of knowledge, especially if you know what's going on, you know how bad it is. It's not that whole scary in the back of our heads. Oh, it could get worse. Oh, what's going on? Get the facts and let the experts handle it. There's a reason all of us are in our different aspects of the transaction, why there takes so many of us. You need an expert in that specific part. That one was fun. Illegally splitting lots. I have a property that is adjacent to multiple vacant lots. The family had owned it out in more rural area of San Diego. And well, once upon a time, the family divided up the lots and sold them off. And it was not handled properly. This is why we always want to have a great title partner and an escrow company to work with us to make sure we're educated and we're taking the correct steps for recording, making sure these parcels can be sold off, that everything's in appropriate order so that the buyer can move forward with their part of the transaction if they're going to do any building or anything like that. Having to find out which ones are now, I guess my understanding, and we're still working through this one, the family had to buy back the lots, but they didn't buy back all the lots. So we can't reconfigure everything to the original configuration because we're missing a piece of the original lot that was split. So that now it cannot be made whole and returned to where it was, like just kind of expunge the record. These are reasons why you need a good title officer. These are reasons why you need a title expert to work with. I've got several that I've worked with over the years. I'm very grateful for their expertise. Again, part of why with everything that's going on in our industry and questioning the need for, realtors and all the DOJ commission stuff, which we're not getting into today, there are reasons we all have these jobs. There are reasons that we have people that have become experts in specific topics of our job and our whole transaction that we're party to. because there's so much to know. And especially here in California and San Diego being one of the more litigious counties, I can't hold it all in my brain. But I love knowing that I've got experts that I can go to. And right now we've got one who's walking us through this, tidying it up, making sure that everybody knows what's going on, full disclosure, no surprises while they're in the middle of the transaction. The buyer understands what they're getting into. Take the time to make sure when you're taking a listing that you are talking to your title expert, that you're getting a prelim pulled ahead of time, and that you're doing the research for it. Allergies are crazy because I live on a canyon. It's been a little nuts. Okay. Title officers are very important. Make sure you're talking to one. Make sure you're getting that prelim. Make sure you're getting your pre-listing info. Make sure you're pulling the title, double checking it, seeing what's going on. That leads into another one that we had. Excuse me. I know this has been part of why the RLA was changed to limit to only 2 years for a listing time period, along with modification of terms. You can only list for an additional 1 year. There are predators out there, and they're hitting up on older individuals, or maybe not as savvy individuals, who have properties that have equity in them and don't understand what they're signing. We had one where they definitely did a predatory situation where they gave her some cash up front, said, great, we'll list it in a couple of years. The market shifted, and suddenly we were in 3 different escrows. And it was a situation where we didn't understand or know all the levels of what had been happening. The seller didn't fully disclose all of what they'd agreed to, any of the paperwork they had. The paperwork she did have was very limited. It wasn't completed. It was very kind of gray. The original listing agent with the right to purchase did decide to walk away and cancel. We've moved on. It's gotten cleaned up. Find out what your clients have done before you take the listing. Ask the questions. Hey, have you talked to anybody? Have you signed anything about the property? Have you done anything along the lines that might have encumbered the title? Again, circling back to our title buddies, run that prelim, get the SI filled out as soon as you can to see what's recorded. We all know there can be unrecorded deeds as well, which can sneak up when they're pulling through things. It's kind of nasty out there. You're going to want to double check, make sure you're doing your due diligence. Don't waste your time listing a property that might not be able to be listed. Take the time to do the effort, do the research, all of that stuff ahead of time. That's why we have our title reps. That's why we have all this due diligence that's required, even of the agents. It'll make your listing go so much smoother. We can tidy up things in the early parts before you're even on the market, or the early days before you're in a deal, before everything's on a time sensitive nature, and before we've got emotions flying and dollars being thrown about. Make sure you're doing the research. Another thing to talk to your clients about when you're taking a listing. We had the seller delay close by not vacating. They just didn't want to get out. They didn't have a place to go. They didn't know what they were doing. They had delayed. There was a little bit of hoarding. Take a look around the property. Have a realistic conversation with your client. Dealing with my mom's estate and what we've done, it's taken us 2 months to just clean up, and we live here and we're staying here in the property. There's so much that's involved moving a property. There's so much involved of going through the property, all the things that you don't see because you live with it all the time. You don't realize. So talking to your clients about starting to do some garage sales and purges and see what family wants and those type of things, making sure you're remaining enough for your staging. It's really an important conversation to have during the listing, and kind of be aware of the property when you go to list the property. Look at everything. Look in the closets. Look in the garage. Find out if there's stuff in the attic. Is the shed packed full? How's it going to get moved? What's the plan? And then you can come up with a strategy where you're supporting your client by addressing their concerns, fears. They may not have any clue how to do this. They may be on their own. They may not have family. They haven't moved in 30 years. Who knows? And there's so many emotions tied, as we know, to our possessions and to the location and everything else. It's definitely worth a conversation. So a lot of these circle back to, during your listing, having a few more questions, asking the leading questions, not very open-ended questions, using your sensory skills, paying attention to what you see at the property, asking the uncomfortable ones that may not be the most, I'm going to be the easiest salesperson to work with. How about let's focus on, I'm going to be there for you. and I'm going to provide that value that's going to help get you this property sold. And we may have to go through some uncomfortable steps to get there, but I'll be with you the whole way and you're not alone. That would be a better point of source of value to bring to these transactions, to these listings, to these interactions. And that's where you get that referral going and the referral based business, all of that fun stuff. Take the time. It is worth the effort. It doesn't seem like it. It can be overwhelming, but it's really important. Let's see, TDS section 1. So this happens all the time. And what I want to point out here, this law was changed, I think it's about 4 years ago now. And it was a clarification situation. So a lot of the builders and different people didn't want to have to use the TDS as long as they still conveyed the same information. And if they already had all the reports and everything else, why do they have to fill out another form? That's like 1% of transactions throughout the state of California. Typically, most are not substituting disclosures. Now, you may have had disclosures from a purchase that the seller is now selling or that buyer is now selling. You may have disclosures from a previous escrow that fell out. That's not the same as this. This is saying you are substituting documents for the TDS. We're not doing that. We're adding additional. So on the page 1 of the SPQ, that's where you can list that you have additional documents, and that's where you can reference those. You do not want to be doing it here on TDS section 1. And if you do this incorrectly, per the RPA, you've incorrectly filled out a TDS. I don't have a correct TDS. I get 5 more days. And I will find those 5 more days if my client needs it. So stop, read this over with your clients, pay attention, but typically you're going to be down here at no substitutions for disclosures. Those additional documents are not substitutions, they're additional. They're supporting documents, they're more material fact information, but they are not replacing the TDS, which is a civil code document. Something to be aware of. This gets messed up all the time, or people don't mark the box, then you're still giving me 5 more days. Like, take a few moments to review this with your seller and make sure they understand what they're reading and what that implication is. Aggressive counterparts. Oh, goodness gracious. I know it's really tough out there. It has been tough. I've been doing this for 21 years in April. I love my job. I grew up in a real estate family. I was my mom's GPS back in the day with the Thomas brothers, for those of us that are old enough to remember going to Costco to buy one every year. And that was a map that was on this bound map that was the and had all the great ways of finding things for those born, after 20 or 2000. But it's hard. And I understand that we all don't work the same. And I understand we all have different energy. And I understand that it's challenging. Minding your manners will go a long way. Your reputation precedes you. And knowing that any of this communication that can come across snarky, because text doesn't always convey emotion, that is in a record that could be requested in court. Be careful. Be aware. Take a deep breath. Step away. Keep it to the facts. Don't waste your time. It's not worth your energy. The escrow will be over soon. But just know that, yes, there are a lot of very intense individuals out there who a lot of times we come from a place, anger is a result of fear or concern or nervousness. Step back, breathe, stick to the facts, and just keep it in writing and be careful. I'm seeing more and more items that I have concern that if we ever went to court, that could be a red flag for somebody. Request for repairs. Oh, this one was a little dicey. So there was a request for repairs, and then the seller did the 4RR back. They modified the response was modified, and the buyer rejected it. And so in the process of the rejecting, they rejected a credit. They then re-requested the same credit that they were going to be given, but then added a professional cleaning. They could have lost that credit, because once you reject with request for repairs, even before that, as we stated at the beginning of this video, requests for repairs are not a requirement of the contract. They're not a contingency of the contract. Property is sold as is. Seller doesn't have to respond. Seller doesn't have to acknowledge, nothing. So if you've already got this credit, you're going to want to keep this credit by accepting, and then you can do another request for repairs. You can ask again. That's why we have multiple forms. Now, I know I was looking at it and the forms change where it says this now, you can't accept any prior to this. So I've got to take a look and find out what's going on, but I haven't heard that you can't ask for more than one request for repairs. And when you're doing a professional cleaning, that's not really a repair. That could have been on an addendum or something else. So The fact of stop and think about what are you doing when you're adjusting things. It's the same as any type of negotiation, any type of countering. If it's not fully executed and it's not part of the contract that's already agreed to with the meeting of the minds, both parties have signed, they could have lost it. Seller didn't have to go ahead and agree to the next one. We had an addendum. It ended up getting settled. It was fine, but that's the risk. And make sure you're stopping and thinking and what is the best thing for your client and looking at the whole thing. And that's why you have your broker of record to talk to, or an office manager with experience, or have questions about a form, talk to a car forms trainer like me or somebody else. But make sure you're getting all the nitty gritty and seeing the little steps. There's a lot of these little things that could trip you up, and that's somebody's commission that they could have lost. And I'm not in the place to do that. I don't know about you, but I don't think you are either. So make sure you're taking time, read it through, make sure it's the right end result you want. Sometimes maybe it would be better just to gift the professional cleaning to your client. Who knows? I don't want to spend your money for you, but look at the big picture. Look at all the pieces before you make a move. Insurance is part of investigation, not loan. So as we all know, insurance is very challenging right now in California because of all the changes and everything that's happened with the fires, now with the floods. It's just crazy out here. And, insurance is made because they don't want to spend money. They don't want to have to give out money. That's the whole point of insurance. Well, when you go, I have had this happen multiple times where the loan's not done and they're like, oh, we haven't done insurance, but they've removed the entire investigation contingency. Well, up here at the top, if you see investigation of the property, that actually includes insurance. And you can go check this out in the RPA in these sections in 3L3, 8C, and 12, along with 12B2. All of that is telling you, do not think that if you remove your investigation contingency and tell me, well, we can't get the loan because of insurance. Well, you were supposed to investigate that before you remove that contingency. Pay attention to these different things. I'll see this a lot where inspection is removed. The inspection contingency is removed. There is no inspection contingency. There's investigation contingency. And investigation is a different word than inspection. You're going to want to make sure that you pay attention to those things because that's the stuff that can get tripped up in court. Know what the terms are. Know what matches the documents that are on file that are being referenced within the contract. Make sure you get your clients. That's why we have that new disclosure, the BHIA, the Buyer Home Insurance Advisory. That is on everything. That is the second you pull a contract, that pops up. There's a reason we need the buyer to start. The second they are looking at properties, they need to start looking in the areas, talk to their insurance company, finding out what the requirements are. I know I'm not alone. I've had multiple deals fall apart because the insurance premiums were just too high or it pushed over the ratios for the loans. So be aware, take your time. If you're researching in a certain area of town, some of the more rural areas, or we know where some of the big fires have been, canyon, I live on a canyon myself. Do you have an insurance person you can talk to have your client talk to? Do you have somebody who's an expert in the area who can help educate them? These things are going to keep coming up. It's only going to get more so that I'm pretty sure by June, because June, we're going to have a huge review and update of all the forms. We're getting new contracts, new listings. It's going to be a lot. I'm going to be doing a lot of videos on this. Make sure you're paying attention because I'm pretty sure we're going to have an an insurance investigation contingency become its own standalone one. It kind of is now with this, but I think it's going to be even more so its own because of how much change is happening in the state of California. Let's see. Then also notice of default filed. That circles back to the beginning of checking your client's documents, checking the title before you take the listing, running a seller net, making sure you're not short. I know we're out of practice from short sales, and it seems it couldn't happen with the amount of equity that most properties have generated in the past few years. It's not always true. So you're going to want to make sure, again, a lot of this circles back. Everything pretty much has been conversation with the buyer at the beginning of the transaction, conversation with the seller at the beginning of the transaction. So much could be mitigated and avoided if we had jumped over that. It would have really, really helped. The other one that I did not, I jumped over. Again, same conversation thing. Who is going to be on title? I don't care who's on the loan. If you're on title, I have to have you sign everything in the file. And if we're going to add you, which is RPA 23, there's a deadline for that. Typically, it's the same as your contingencies the first 17 days. And then once you re-add people on, everybody's going to have to sign. So I had one go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth because the lender couldn't, there was some disconnects and miscommunication. Have a very clear conversation with the lender, have a clear conversation with your client, who's going to go on, who's required for credit. It's much easier to take people off. Adding from the beginning is much safer. We can always remove people. That is one document. Bringing people back in, that's every document on file. It's a lot of work. It's crazy making for everybody. And escrow might tell you, oh, no, we just can do our amendment. That's for escrow. They report to the Department of Corporations. We report to the Department of Real Estate, the DRE. We have rules in this contract we have to follow. And with that, we need to make sure that we are doing all the correct steps. Then on top of that, you've got risk management because it says you only have to initial the first page of a document. Well, if I've got a good lawyer, I'm going to have them initial where the other buyer did. That's what I always do. Whoever's already initialed, you're going to do the exact same thing. All buyers will do the exact same thing across the board. I want to make sure everybody saw every piece of paper so we don't have any surprises at the end if they just got thrown on to get a deal done. So it was definitely an interesting month. I will be doing these the last Thursday of the month moving forward, just as a recap of what I've seen. There are different little things that help us all kind of stay aware and pay attention. Next week, I'm going to talk about W-9s. Why does the buyer's agent have to give that to the other broker? Why am I giving up this tax info? Escrow handles all of it, but do they? As always, verify everything with the broker record of the file you were working on. I'm happy to talk about this anytime until I'm blue in the face. Sam Hayes, One Stop Transaction Services, 619-993-7264. Thank you so much for your time and being here today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stop that share and I'm going to end this. Have a great Thursday.